Happy to have you here with me in the locker room today, everybody. I'm Alan Locher. Oscar and Emmy Award-winning filmmaker and my friend Anthony Giacchino is here to tell us about his latest project, the podcast True Crimes of Black Hand, New York. Anthony will delve into the story of Joe Petrosino, the fearless New York City police detective who led the Italian squad against New York's Black Hand crime syndicates, paving the way for modern organized crime investigations. Anthony's remarkable career includes the Academy Award-winning documentary Colette and Director by Night, which tells the story of his brother, Michael Giacchino, stepping behind the camera for the first time. Now he brings his investigative storytelling to Petrosini's world, uncovering forgotten tales of heroism, mystery, and justice in the first two episodes that are out now, The King of Mulberry Street. Please help me welcome to the locker room, Anthony Giacchino.
Hey,
Anthony.
Hi. Thank you so much for.
Thank you so much.
Now, I know you have lots of people on this show, lots of them, but we go way back.
We do.
Yes, like way back. I mean, probably even before. I wonder, even before I moved to New York City in 1995. I mean, it must be because you were at my 20th birthday party
in 1990.
Yes, yeah. In 1990. So it's
I think I met your brother in 1990, probably.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Because I only started at Disney myself in March of '89, and then I met Michael doing a presentation at his school of Visual Arts.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Right? Well, isn't that where he was? Am I right?
He was at School of Visual Arts. It's funny that you mentioned that because I'm actually teaching a course there this semester.
I saw that. Yeah. I was doing I think a presentation probably for Dick Tracy because that came out in 1990.
Okay.
And I met Michael, and then Michael came to work with me at Disney.
Now wait, is this I mean, I may have this story wrong, but I remember he told a story about someone doing and asking for interns, and he was like one of the only, because it was unpaid, right? It was an unpaid internship.
Yeah, it might have. Yeah, I mean, definitely.
I remember him saying that it was something that he saw at SVA. Someone came. Maybe that was you. That's really interesting.
It was me.
Yes,
it was me, which is crazy. You know. To think.
Yeah. But it's good to see you. It's been a long time.
It has been a long time, but we have so much to talk about. You have so much, but I want to talk about the podcast first.
Yes. Yeah.
Your original idea was to create a podcast solely about Detective Joe Petrosini's story. And his story you have been sort of researching through since 2005. How did you first learn about him?
So it's an interesting story. I mean, for myself, as a documentarian, because I mean, it's funny you could say, documentary filmmaker, but I prefer the term documentarian because I kind of feel like what I do and what I'm interested in transcends just filmmaking, but it could be in preservation. It could be in researching stories. It could be living for hours and weeks at an archive to be able to get the material to tell a specific story. And the story of Joe Petrosino is something that I didn't know anything about, except that one day my wife and I were walking through Little Italy, and then we came up to around Kenmore Street, and there was this little tiny park, a triangle of a park called Petrosino. It was called Petrosino Park at that time.
Oh, wow. And
I will always stop, no matter what it is, I will always stop at a historic marker and read it. Like, what was that? What happened here?
No matter what city you're in?
Yeah, I'm sorry?
No matter what city you're in?
Yeah, no matter what. I mean, if I'm able to get to it, yes, I will stop and take a look at that. And I will say, oh, okay. So I was like, Petrosino, who's this guy? And I read the story, and I'm looking, and it was basically there was a plaque, but it was a reprint of an old New York Times article about his funeral. And I learned like immediately that there were 250,000 people at this man's funeral, that he had been murdered in Palermo, Sicily, on a secret mission for the NYPD to investigate, well, the mafia at the time, something that they called the Black Hand. But he was murdered, and that nobody knew who had murdered him. But he was so well known at the time that I was sort of struck by this idea that 250,000 people showed up at his funeral. How in the world? I don't even know who this guy is. He has a little park here. So I went to the New York Public Library a couple days later, because this was in the time before you were able to just look things up on the internet, really, in sort of this mass way that we can do today. And I just spent days there going through old newspaper articles, and I was really surprised at how much had been written about him at the time. He was this hero. They called him the Italian Sherlock Holmes. I learned that he was an Italian immigrant, came in 1873 as a 13-year-old boy from a town called Padula, Italy, in southern Italy. And he just made his way like most Italian immigrants. So he worked as a newspaper boy, shining shoes. Then he joined the sanitation department, which was at the time under the jurisdiction of the NYPD. And a member of the NYPD saw him and liked how he sort of treated his crew, thought that he was a tough guy, that he, might do well in the police department. And he joins the police in 1883. He becomes a police officer, just a regular walking the beat police officer. And he does that until 1895, when Teddy Roosevelt, who was police commissioner, promotes him to detective, and he becomes the first Italian detective in the NYPD. And why that's important and also pretty fascinating is you have to imagine. So in this time in the 1890s, now there's large waves of Italian immigrants coming. The vast majority are from southern Italy, and there are no Italian police officers. So you have, as the years go on, and then into the early 1900s, over 100,000 Italian immigrants arriving every year, and they don't speak English, and there are no police officers who speak Italian. So the cops who were patrolling Little Italy at the time are Irish, German descent. They really can't talk to each other. So there's just a lot of misunderstanding. So he kind of steps in as this figure that could bridge these two communities, this immigrant community and this policing community. And then eventually he becomes known as the expert on, solving Black Hand crimes. And the Black Hand,
that was really going to be my question. What is a Black Hand crime?
Yeah, well, a Black Hand crime would be, let's say you were an Italian immigrant who had a bank, or you had a barber shop, or you had a butcher shop, and you'd be sitting there, and then someone may come in, or you may receive a letter, and the letter would say, the Society of the Black Hand, and this is all in Italian, the Society of the Black Hand demands $700, or we're going to blow up your shop, right? Mm-hmm. And those threats, or we're going to kidnap your child, or we're going to, murder your whole family. It was basically the Black Hand. It was a method of crime. It was a method of extorting Italian immigrants. It was not some vast, like mafia-like syndicate. The press believed that, and the public believed that, because every time something like this happened, it was really, this is also at a time in the early 1900s when New York City is in the midst of a giant newspaper battle, a newspaper war, right? Yellow journalism, where, the most outrageous headline, who's going to sell the most. So they really played up this idea of Italian crime, and and then that they were this society the Black Hand was doing this. It was kind of a myth. However, criminals took advantage of this idea, And for example, you and I could start a Black Hand gang back then if we wanted to. It would just be it's a letter writing operation, and and you would deliver stuff. But it became a real thing. I mean, by the early 1900s, and it's kind of shocking to hear this now, is that there were weekly bombings in Lower Manhattan, where dynamite was going off in these shops. So it was a real problem. The problem was real. A society didn't exist.
Did you know any of this prior to doing it?
No. I didn't know any of it. And then Petrosino, comes to, and he's arguing by the time he becomes a detective, is that we need more Italians on the force, and we should have a squad. He's arguing for a specific Italian squad, and then in 1904, September 1904, that happens. The new not Teddy Roosevelt's already moved on. Creates an Italian squad, and it's Petrosino and 9 men who are tasked with basically solving, as detectives, the crimes, where you're now with hundreds of thousands of Italians, you have 9 men trying to figure this stuff out. So so I was like really fascinated by that idea, that it was an immigrant story. It was a story really about, I think, community policing in a way, because it was like, how do you go into these immigrant communities and and get the trust? Because the truth is that Italians at that time, as I said, most of them come from Southern Italy, and there was just a culture of distrust for power, for police in Italy, in Southern Italy. And that just carried over here, to New York. So Petrosino is trying to bridge these two worlds, is trying to, get people, who were his compatriots, fellow immigrants, to trust the police, and for the police to trust that not every single one of them were criminals, because, the press did really portray, and this is also at a time, it's actually a really fascinating time in history of like social Darwinism, of eugenics, of these very weird ideas of race, that Europe could be kind of split into different races, that, and of course, like the Italians, as you travel down the leg of Italy down to the boot, they're becoming less and less European, less and less white, right? The U.S. government put out a pamphlet called a Dictionary of Races. Like all of this stuff is going on, and Petrosino sort of is in the middle of all of this, and this idea of this crime, of race, of policing, and it was just a fascinating story. So I was like, well, there was a book written about him in the 70s. There was not a great movie in 1960 called The Black Hand, which starred Ernest Borgnine. That
Oh, wow.
played, yeah. Did
you watch that?
Yes, I did. And in fact, I mean, I'll tell you, yes, I did. And later on, I got to know Petrosino's granddaughter.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, but you had this all mapped out, and that was going to be your focus. But what changed?
Oh, yeah. Well, this is what happened. What happened is that I thought, well, this would be a great documentary to make. I would love to tell the story of Joe Petrosino. I just found it very hard. The pitching I didn't think was hard, but people wanting to tell this story, I just could not get interest in networks, which seemed crazy, because I would always say, I mean, look, his nemesis basically was a man named Giuseppe Morello. Okay, he came from Corleone, Sicily. He was the first boss of bosses in the United States. I mean, he comes from Corleone. I would always say, this is basically The Godfather without the fiction. Yes, exactly. But it's not fictional. You have the story. It's an unsolved murder. There was a secret mission. It's got, the mafia police. But I just had a hard time getting financing or getting people interested. So after all of this time, and I had met his granddaughter, who had provided me with just an unbelievable wealth of family information, documentation from his police records and all of this stuff, that I just decided, I should really, I would love to maybe do an audio story on this. I mean, that's what I thought. I mean, I had the material, and it was something that I felt that I could do on my own. Plus, as I said, I was, I don't necessarily just consider myself a filmmaker, but as in terms of a documentarian, I've always been interested in audio and audio stories. And I thought, well, I should do that. So
Is this your first audio story?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it depends. It depends. And the reason I say it depends is because when I was in high school, I
know you've been doing things since you and your brother. Incredible.
You probably were on some of this, but I used to carry around a tape recorder with me for years and years and just tape recording my life, my friend's life. So I always loved the idea of audio, but I decided, hey, I'm going to tell this story.
What's so interesting though about that? I mean, you were really carrying a tape recorder, not your iPhone, not an easy device, not a small camera because we didn't have them back then.
Yeah. It was, and I am almost done. I had about 200 tapes from 1987. They go into the early 90s, or I'm sorry, like the mid 90s. There's a couple, but anyway, I have and I'm almost finished digitizing them. So I have all of that. I still have all of that material. So I thought, well, I'll just do a podcast on this because I think I could do that effectively. And then as just over the years, I just found so many ancillary and related stories around that I thought it would be, maybe it's just as a better idea to kind of build out the world that Petrosino lived in, sort of meet some of these characters as a way of paving the way for a bigger story about him. So that's what the True Crimes of Black Hand New York is about. It is about some of the cases that he would have been involved in, but it's also just about that time period.
In 2009, you also curated the New York City Police Museum's Centennial exhibit on him. Yeah. How did that come? And that must have been really fun.
It was great. And it came together pretty quickly. It happened because the previous year I had met Petrosino's granddaughter, who was, when Petrosino was murdered in 1909, his mother was only 3 months old. Sorry, not his mother, her mother, his daughter.
Yeah.
His daughter, her mother, was only 3 months old. So she grew up without knowing her father, but they kept everything from I imagine what I imagine is they must have emptied out his office and just given everything to his widow, because what she had was like the funeral veil she wore to, obviously the funeral. They had all of that kind of personal stuff, all of the condolence letters that were written to her after Petrosino was murdered, but also arrest warrants, police notebooks. There was a lot of police material that was in there. Also, letters from Teddy Roosevelt, letters from William McKinley. It was this incredible amount of material that his granddaughter, her name was Susan Burke, she passed away in June 2 years ago.
Uh-huh.
She basically said, listen, you want to do a project about him, that's great. You can take the stuff, and my only hope is that it'll eventually end up in a museum someday. So she had the Indiana Jones mentality. It belongs in a museum, which I agreed with. And I took the stuff and digitized everything over a year. And then the New York City Police Museum on the Centennial, which was in 2009 of his assassination, said, hey, we heard you have all this stuff. Do you want to help us with an exhibit? And I was like, yes, I would love to do that. And
when the granddaughter sort of had all that stuff and you were allowed to go through it, is that like a candy store for you, Anthony?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. In fact, when I saw all of the material, I was she was teaching at a Catholic high school in Brooklyn at the time, and she kept everything there. That's where she was just keeping it stored. And when she told me, oh, you can take this stuff, I didn't feel comfortable taking it. I was like, how in the world, why is she going to let me take all this material? But I was there with the former detective who had helped me track her down. And he said, wow. Oh, no, you should definitely take the stuff. I mean, she's offering it to you. You should take it because, you never know what would happen. if you say no, you might not get another chance. Anyway, take the material. He said. Okay, I'll take it. So yeah, it was great because you had a real sense of him in a way that you couldn't get out of the newspapers, even though he was, I mean, certainly weekly in the newspapers during his career. They were always writing about him, but certainly the letters that people wrote to his wife after his murder revealed lots of details, interesting things about him. Like, he was known for really never smiling, not being a man of many words, always had this very serious look on his face. And if you see any images of him, you'll see that. But the letters in there were really great because they talked about how one person had written about how they'll never forget how happy he was on the day of his daughter's christening, and he was running around giving people cake, and he was just like a kid, So you got real. You could get a little bit closer to him as a person by touching all of this material. So it was really fantastic.
That's incredible. I'm going to show a picture of him in a second, but the first 2 episodes are out now. The King of Mulberry Street.
Yeah.
Tell everybody because these don't necessarily focus on him, but it's a fascinating story as well. And what blew me away is all the, I know you have, and you'll mention who you spoke to, but the detail was, there was so much detail for something that is from so long ago that I was really impressed.
Yeah. So I kind of, I'm figuring this out as I go. My rule is on the podcast is that it needs to be related to Petrosino in some way, obviously. And I like to find interesting ways into this. So this story, The King of Mulberry Street, tells the story of a man whose name was Rafael Cascone, who was an Italian immigrant who came in the early 1900s and really just sort of rose as a prominent criminal in New York. Now,
by the way, all of the names are amazing.
Yeah. I know. It's like you really need basically you either need an Italian teacher, or a native Italian to really pronounce their names and stuff. But basically, the reason I came across this story was simply it came out of the archive of that Petrosino's granddaughter gave me. There was a condolence letter, and on one of the condolence letters was sent from a candle maker who was a very good friend of the Petrosino family. His name was Antonino Giacchino, and he just wrote a very simple, "I'm so sorry, my friend of 30 years is gone. I'm sending my condolences." But on the back of that letter, it was like letterhead, there was a photograph of this huge candle, a gigantic candle, and a little caption underneath of it says, this candle was, it says it's 18 feet tall. There's no way it was 18 feet tall. It must have been maybe like 10 feet tall. But it said, this candle was made for Rafael Cascone, who spent 3 years and so many months in Sing Sing prison on death row, basically promised to have it made if he was released. And he was released. And I thought, so I just thought, oh, that's really interesting. I don't know who that guy is. I wonder what his story is. So I just started, and I'm a huge fan of newspapers.com, who's come on as a sponsor of the podcast. Like for years, all of my stuff has really been told through that site. I went on and I just looked him up, Rafael Cascone. Oh, he was on death row. And I'm thinking, oh, he must have mistakenly been on death row and somehow he got off. Well, the story that unraveled from that was unbelievable.
Yeah.
This guy was incredible. And I don't want to give away everything.
Don't give it away.
But it led me to track down his great-granddaughter. I simply just wanted to know if a relative existed and knew anything about it. And it just so happened she had been for 15 years researching her great-grandfather and writing.
The information that she had in her brain that that she talks about on the podcast is incredible. The detail.
Absolutely. She has his trial transcripts. He, obviously the immigration stuff. She knew where he lived. the different stories about him. You know, he became known as the King of Mulberry Street just by his own presence and really his criminality. I mean, he ran these, you know, high stakes card games. He had a brothel. He had a saloon, you know, a restaurant. You know, he had, you know, admittedly killed people, but in a previous, before he was on Sing Sing, but it was like a self-defense thing. I mean, it's a great story. And what I also like about it, though, is not just his own story, but is talking to his granddaughter because she was in a way sort of struggling with this terrible character in her family history. And it was her way of dealing with it, just the research and maybe writing the book. And that really, I kind of found that fascinating because it went beyond, it kind of was a story that's, for me, it's like kind of the story that I involved in, where it has a deeper meaning for someone. And it's not just something that you're pulling off of you know, out of a newspaper somewhere or out of an archive, but that it in some way still reaches out to you in the presence. And I'm sorry, in the present. And it was reaching out to her in a way of like, oh, I got this guy in my family history, you know, but I'm going to just dive in and see what I can find out about him. And it was really great. Yeah, it was really,
I mean, it's amazing too, even what you found out from on Joe and about Raphael, because it's not stuff on the internet.
No,
like,
yeah,
you know, it's like we can look in the last couple of years from the internet and find things, but like the amount of information that you found that really had to be dug up in libraries and possibly police stations or wherever else. But yeah, I mean,
it's funny. That's
Here's,
actually funny you say that.
Detective Joe.
Oh yeah, there he is. That's him. That's Joe Petrosino. But I would just, on that point you just made, it's really funny because a friend of mine was listening to the podcast and he's like, oh, I got to listen to episode 2 so I can find out what happened to his brother. He goes, you know, before I look it up, before I Google it. And I was like, you're not going to find it if you Google it.
I'd be shocked if you found.
Yeah. You wouldn't find it. You really have to listen to it to hear the conclusion of that story.
Is there anything about him on the web? I didn't think to look
on
Joe or Raphael.
I mean, you know, I would caution people to stay away from Joe Petrosino's Wikipedia entry. There's a lot of just not great information on there about him. It's interesting because they talk about how, I mean, I have no clue where the story comes from. They talk about the story about how, you know, he came over here with his grandfather and his grandfather was run over by a carriage and an Irish judge took pity on him and took him. It was there's just this absolute fabrication of this bizarre story that's out there that I don't know why. That there's some stuff. I mean, I probably would say that probably that Wikipedia page is the biggest thing, you know, on him. But I'm trying to
not accurate.
Yeah, exactly. That's not accurate. But I'm trying to, you know, build the real source around him.
Well, I loved the end of the podcast because you shared who did the music.
Oh yeah, yeah. My nephew, Mick Giacchino. And it's so funny because, you know, that came together pretty quickly because he was here in New York, I think in September. Yeah, whereas it was early October. He lives in LA, but he came out here and we were having dinner and I was just telling him about it. And I'm like, listen, I know that you just did the Penguin. I know you just did the Penguin. So I'm telling you, I need a theme. Basically, you know, just
he did the music for the Penguin on Max.
Yeah.
What? Yeah. I didn't know.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
First of all,
exactly. That's why I had to get him before people started. No, I was just like, and I can't pay you.
I'm so mad. I really should have got this picture that I have of Michael and Mick at some diner in California when he's a baby. When I first.
Oh, really?
I'd gone out to California and met.
Yes. Yep.
Mick's the oldest, right?
Correct. Mick is the oldest of Michael's kids.
I'm pretty sure it has to be him. It
Yeah.
has to be him. He was a
So
baby.
so he just did that, and I was like, it's just like I need 1 minute. I need 1 minute of music, and let's talk about it because
I love that he's following in Dad's footsteps. That's
oh
amazing.
yeah,
That's
yeah. I
amazing.
think that there's some other stuff. I know there's some other stuff coming down the line. I won't say because I don't know if I should.
Oh yeah, don't get him in trouble.
I won't get him in trouble. Yes, but there's other stuff. Yeah, but that's great. I love that. I love that you listen to the credits.
Oh yeah, I did. Yeah.
Yes. That's good.
Where can folks find it? I have the link up, I believe, below.
Yes. So the podcast itself is on Patreon, and it's up there for free. You can listen to it for free. So it's True Crimes of Blackhand, New York, on Patreon. And I mean, I should have come prepared to know the exact thing, but I think
no. It's up down below on YouTube. I have the Patreon.
Okay, yeah.
And I'll make sure it's there.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
It is up. It is up there now.
Perfect. And it's thank you for that, because I'm also just sort of starting this out, and I do think that this is it's a time period in history. I mean, it's more than just like a true crime podcast. I mean, it is that, but it's also a history podcast. It's about sort of the specific time in Italian immigration and American history, and there's just and the birth basically of the American mafia. It cuts across so many really interesting.
I found so much history of just New York at that time, the way you shared and she shared in those 2 episodes. Where did your love of history first begin?
I think I loved dinosaurs. I know that sounds kind of crazy, but when I was little.
No, but that's historic, right?
Yeah, well, historic. But it led me to like want to be able to time travel and see what they look like to really see what does a dinosaur look like. And I would always just imagine myself, traveling, in my backyard in New Jersey back to see if I could, see that. But so then I just kind of and I had some really great history teachers in high school, especially. And I wanted to become a high school history teacher. I went to Villanova University. I went in as an education major. And
you studied German history, right?
Well, yes, but not initially.
Okay.
Initially I was going in as an education major, and I was going to focus on social studies. But in my first semester at Villanova, probably within the first couple of weeks, I was sitting in the classroom, and I was just looking around, and everybody was quiet. The teacher was just talking. Somebody was drinking something, and there was and I was thinking, and I literally thought to myself, wait, where are the discipline problems? There's not. And then I was like, maybe I should just why would I want to be a high school history teacher if I got to deal with kids who are misbehaving? I think maybe I'll just become a history professor. And the next semester, I changed my major to history and thought, okay, I'm going to become a history professor. And I was just on that track. And then I decided I majored in German as well, because I was interested in German history and World War II in that era. But I was also interested in,
where did that come from? Because that's what I was curious about.
I don't know. I'm not sure. There was just something
it just piqued your interest.
Yeah, I was just interested in it. I mean, it could have been. I mean, I had actually, again, another really great teacher, a German teacher, that I went to Germany for the first time when I was in college, and I just thought, oh, this was great. I mean, it was my first time in Europe, abroad, and I was at a summer program where I was studying with students from all over the world, and I just thought, this is maybe my future's in this also, or just at least another language. So I studied German. I majored in German and history. And then I ended up getting a Fulbright scholarship to continue study after graduating from Villanova. And I was in Germany for 2 years. I was in my Fulbright the first year. I taught English the second year. And then I just came home thinking I've been in school my whole life and I should maybe work, or I should get a job or something. And I bet you in those years, this is like around 94, 95. I moved to New York with the idea because my brother-in-law said, hey, I heard there's this thing called the History Channel starting. That sounds like a good place for you. And I was just like, that's it. I'm going to work at the History Channel. I didn't like really have a plan except like, that's what I'm going to do. And I remember once.
And you did.
Yes, I ended up. I ended up getting an interview there because I somehow got a phone number, and they put me through, and I got an intern who told me, you got to talk to this person for programming, this person for production. And it was simply that I sent resumes in. The programming people said we're not hiring, but the production people asked me to come in. And they basically asked that question. You didn't study film, you didn't study television or production. Why do you want to work here? And I said, well, I want to work here because it's the History Channel and my background is history, and I would do anything. I would do anything to like live in a library if you let me research. And it just so happened a couple weeks later, they called me and said, we just bought a series or acquired a series from ZDF in Germany called Hitler's Henchmen. It's like 10 hours, and we need help with translation, with revoicing. You've got that background. Do you want to? It's maybe a couple of months of work. Would you want to work on that? I was like, yes. And I went there, and that sort of is where it began for me. And then I got to know people there, and then they're like, oh, do you want to work on this, or can you help out this? So I ended up being there for 12 years.
Yeah, I knew you were there a long time. I'm fascinated because I think I don't really know the answer to this. I didn't like history. I didn't like social studies.
Oh.
I think it had to do with possibly being the child of Holocaust survivors and not.
Oh, that's interesting.
Or
the idea of something like that, really, or not. I don't know how much of it was talked about, but sort of.
Yeah, I don't really think any. I don't really have a memory of that. But today. I don't, read historic books, but I am much more fascinated by history, for sure.
Yeah.
But I do think it's so helpful if
it was in my
looking at our world around us. I think history is so god darn important and would help all of us understand each other and the world better.
Yeah, without a doubt. Like I will tell you that just to circle back very quickly to Joe Petrosino is that I think most people today would be really shocked to understand just how deeply vilified Italian immigrants were at the time when they were coming in the early 1900s. The things that were written about them in newspapers, like I had talked earlier, this idea of social Darwinism and sort of, that they're all inherently criminal and stuff like that. It was really surprising to me reading this, and the examples of it are numerous, and it feels like unending during that period. And I like his story beyond the crime, beyond sort of this policing story and this unsolved mystery story, also because I think of the lesson it teaches us about accepting like newcomers here. People who are coming to this country, the reality is, it seems to me, and it was the same then, is that you're coming here because you really actually want something better. So things are hard enough. And we're hard enough for people, and then to layer on top this like vilification that, they're just all criminals, stuff like that. I think just knowing that's part of American history, it goes maybe a long way in explaining when you hear stuff like that today. For sure. You're just like, okay, so somehow that this is an American viewpoint.
Most immigrants, Italian, my parents were Dutch, come from another place to get, come here for a better life.
Yeah. I mean, like that's really, what it's about. And so I don't know. It's another reason why I like this story. I want to be able to sort of shed light on that idea. Yeah.
It's incredible. I wish you luck. I hope you get it made into a movie.
Yeah.
Your first feature-length documentary, you
Yes.
wrote and directed, the Camden 28.
Yes.
Tell everybody what it was about.
Yeah, that, I could say that still is sort of one of my, it sort of is still one of my favorite stories that that I told. It is basically about it comes out of the Vietnam War era, part of our history with Vietnam. And it was about, it is about a group of anti-war activists from Camden. Well, their action against the war happened in Camden. They weren't all from Camden, but a core group of them were Camden, New Jersey, which is right across the river from Philadelphia, who broke into a draft board. At that time, people were being drafted to Vietnam to fight. And they broke into a draft board in the middle of the night to destroy and steal draft records so that people couldn't be drafted to go over and kill people or be killed. They were pacifists. This was their action against the war. And, the thing that is crazy about it is that there were 3 Catholic priests who were then involved in the break-in. They were known as the Catholic left. There was this movement within the Catholic Church. They were radicals, but they were part of the Catholic peace movement. But they really took their actions against the war next level. Let's say breaking into buildings, destroying records. And at first they would do it openly in the spirit of the civil rights movements, like the sittings, the early sittings. But too many of their people were going to jail for doing that stuff. So they just decided, let's just break into these buildings at night. And they would case buildings. And you have priests and nuns casing buildings. I mean, it's kind of a crazy story, but they would do it. And they would literally rip off and destroy. I can't remember. I think over the course of the war, they had claimed responsibility for like 1 million files that they had destroyed. And back then it was like, if the original file was destroyed, like that was it. They didn't have backup records of them. So you were not going. Sometimes they would actually mail it to the individual whose draft record it was and said, you can make the choice. You know what I mean? If you want to return this, you can return it and you can go to Vietnam. But if you don't want to, you don't have to. So it is about their action. It is about they were arrested by the FBI, and it is about their trial. Yeah.
How did you learn about this?
Because I had a great history teacher. Although I didn't learn it in. I kept touch with my history teacher, and he.
What's his name?
His name is Terry Egan. Terry Egan was a high school history teacher, and he happened to go to the same church that my parents were in Camden, New Jersey. And he just said, hey, did you ever, somehow he found out I was like looking for something to do. He said, hey, you should talk to Mick or Father Doyle about Cam 28. And I was like, what is that? He's like, oh, it's a great story. You should talk to him. So after Mass one day, I just asked the priest, Father Doyle, I was like, hey, you tell me about the Cam 28. I'd love to sit and talk. And sat down and talked like 4 hours about it. One day we set up and I was like, oh my God, this is an incredible story. And that's how it started. Just that connection, a good teacher. And that was a very long project. I mean, it's not unlike that was 10 years to really get to know the people, to eventually raise money, to go and interview them, and to put that together. So that started in 1996, and I finished it in late 2006, and then it was on PBS on their series POV in 2007. Yeah, so that was the first one.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
And I love, when we open our mouths and mention something like your history teacher, just, you ever hear of this story and boom.
Yeah.
You
never know where it's going to, where things lead. And that's kind of sort of the story of a couple of my films were that way.
But that's great. Well, let's talk about the one that you won an Academy Award for in 2021.
Yes.
Colette.
Yes. Colette.
How did that story come to you? And you mentioned to me backstage that you almost said no.
Yes. Well, yes, that is true. I almost said no, but it wasn't like someone was like, "Hey, do you want to do a film on Colette?" It wasn't like that at all. Surprisingly, that film grew out of a video game. Yes, you're about to spit out your whatever you were drinking. You're just like, what?
Wait, what?
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Okay, that I need to understand.
Yes.
Because,
yeah.
First of all, Anthony won the Academy Award for Best Documentary Short, and it's based on Colette Marin Catherine, who fought the Nazis as a member of the French Resistance. So, hearing that as a video game,
yes. So this is how it started. So basically in 2016, I had just finished. There were two films I had done. I had done one on Brad Bird and the making of the Iron Giant. That was called The Giant's Dream. I did that for Warner Brothers for, I think it was the 20th anniversary of a Blu-ray release. And I really loved that film. I loved working on that film. I love the Iron Giant, but just telling the story of Brad trying to make that film, it's extreme. I mean, if you haven't seen it, check it out. It's really a great, it's a fun film. And then I did one, and then the same year I did basically it was a companion piece to when the History Channel in the same year had, they remade Roots. I don't know if you saw the remade version, but I thought it was really great. I thought the version, it was really fantastic. And they reached out to me because I had done a few things for them after I had left in 2007. But they said, we need a documentary about this, a companion piece, because we want people to know that this actually was real and that this happened. And on the surface, you might think like, that's kind of crazy. Like, of course it happened, but they understood that there should be a documentary that went along so that people who watch this wouldn't just say, oh, that was just a drama about, about what, slavery was like and stuff. So, it was a good year in the sense of, in terms of creativity. I really loved the projects that I was doing. I kind of felt like this is what I want to do. These are the stories that I want to tell. And then I got a phone call from someone named Peter Hirschman, who worked for Respawn, which is a video game company. Now, he was the game director of the first Medal of Honor game that Steven Spielberg created after he did Saving Private Ryan. And at the time with DreamWorks, Saving Private Ryan, or Spielberg wanted to, he was going to have games, they were going to do video games, they're going to do movies and all this kind of stuff. So when they made this video game called Medal of Honor, Spielberg said that he felt it would be important to have some kind of documentary content in this, because it was basically the same argument that history was making, that kids playing this game should know that this was real. So what they did, so my brother Michael did the music for Medal of Honor. And I think sort of the distinction of that was that that was the first video game that used the live orchestra for the music. And so Michael got to know Peter, and then Peter reached out to me back then in '99, just talking about, hey, would you be interested in doing some archival research? And they had these tiny little documentaries. When you finish a level, it'd be like the Battle of the Bulge was this and that. You'd see some archival stuff and you were out. So Peter calls me in 2016 and said, hey, we're rebooting Medal of Honor. And Spielberg's not involved in it, but I want to stay, true to what he wanted to do. And I want to have documentary content in this, because I want to make sure that the kids, he's basically giving me the same speed, the kids who are playing this know it was a real event. It's fun to blow up Nazis, but they should also know that this was real. What do you think? You want to work on this? And in my head, I was thinking, do I really want to work on a video game? Like wasn't like saying this to Peter, but this was running through my head because I had just done this thing, and I wondered, I was like, is this like a step down for me, a video game? Like I'm gonna work on one of these Medal of Honor, and I don't know. I really was kind of leaning no. I didn't say no, but I was thinking. He said, well, just think about it. He goes, what I would want you to do. You can kind of take it where you want, but I would want you to talk to real veterans, because they're dying off, and we should get their real stories. So then I was like, oh, that's kind of could be interesting. So I just went off and found veterans. I ended up, I went on this thing called Honor Flight, which is where it's a group. It's a national group, but it's kind of like, there's chapters all over the place. There's Honor Flight New York, where I flew down to Washington, D.C. for the day with a group of World War II veterans for them to see the World War II memorial. It was so on that trip, I met these really great characters, these guys, different, one who was one of the first Black Marines, and learned that he had never received his like dress blue uniform. Another one I met whose best friend was killed on their first day in battle. There was another one that had knocked down the gate, he said, to a slave labor camp. He thought it was in Nordhausen, but he couldn't really remember, wasn't sure. Someone who had crashed their glider on during the Normandy invasions. And as I talked to them, the theme that was sort of coming up was the sense of the aftermath of those events were as present as if they had happened when they happened, in their minds. And I just started thinking, gosh, I wonder if they would go back to Europe and try to find these places. So I pitched the idea to Peter, and he's like, well, they're in their 90s, right? He's like, if you can guarantee that they won't die, I'll support them. I was like, all right, I guarantee you they won't. So they support it. Now at this time, then I think Respawn was acquired by Electronic Arts by that time. And Electronic Arts was like, okay, if that's what you want to do. So I got sent on a scout, or I requested a scout. I want to go see all of these locations. I did tons of research, really actually found the gate, not the gate, but the spot where they had knocked the gate down, the field where David's best friend was killed. It's a farm in Germany right now. Found the spot where the glider crashed. Like all of this stuff, we went and we actually did it properly. While we were there, I was having lunch with my tour guide who was taking us around Normandy. And we were just kind of chatting at lunch. And he says, I know a woman who was in the French resistance as a young girl. Her name was Colette, and she's got a really interesting story. She was like just a little kid, but she worked with, her mother. She was collecting license plate numbers and stuff, but she was in the resistance. I can introduce you if you want to meet her. So I said, I was leaving the next day back for the US, but I thought, okay, maybe we should do this. And I had a French producer on the ground who then went and met her later on and called me. He's like, oh, Anthony, she's really great. We should definitely interview her. Wasn't really thinking much beyond. Elise, who was my French producer, wrote down everything on her in a report, basically about the story, which because I just didn't have the time to read it. But when we came back to Europe to film with everybody, when I was in the airport at Charles de Gaulle Airport, I'm like, oh shoot, Elisa's picking me up. I better read the thing she wrote. And I start reading it, and I was shocked to learn that her brother died at Nordhausen, which was the camp that the one vet said that he had knocked the gates down. So I had actually been there already. I had gone there to scout there, and I couldn't believe it. I was like, what? That's it was just so bizarre.
Right, the connection.
Yeah. Side note, you've watched the movie. I discovered that the camp that he liberated was actually on the other side of that mountain. It was not Nordhausen. It was actually on the other side of that mountain. but still part of my research on that
Yeah.
scout was going to Nordhausen, was being there. But now, 7 months later, I'm going to meet Colette, and I found I was actually at that camp where your brother was, and it was a fantastic interview. We just sat her down and interviewed her. She was very combative.
Seemed pretty great.
Yes. Well, she
what
was really
like meeting her.
Well, first of all, she refers to that day. She's still living, by the way. She refers, there she is right there. That was the day. That was the day that we interviewed her. That was in 2018, October of 2018.
Wow.
And she refers to that day as the day that Anthony came and turned my apartment upside down. Because it is true. Because you know what it's like. We had
of course.
And stuff. And so she referred to that, and she was like combative in the interview, like, why do I have to look at the camera? And I, this and that. Now, we used the audio from that interview, but we never used any shots from that interview. But still, we didn't know that at the time. But I would say she was like really, like you see her in the film, very fierce, independent, and sort of very forceful. And then when we were done, she was like, come on, let's get a picture. And she was like really happy. And that picture was taken, with her. She wanted a picture with the crew. And then she said to us, she said, listen, and we weren't even thinking about going, we didn't even have this idea yet. She said, if you ever come back, and she lived in a place called Cannes, not like where the Cannes Film Festival is, but in Normandy. If you ever come back, you're welcome to stay in my apartment. But don't expect me to play tour guide. I'm not going to do that. You can stay overnight, but you're going to be on your own if you come back here. Like that's how we left it. Right. So I was like, okay, I think she likes us. And then just thinking about her story, when we were at Nordhausen, because part of the other story we were telling, the concentration camp where it was of Gil who said he had knocked down the gates. Yeah. We were there the previous summer filming with him, and we took him there to Nordhausen, and he was like, well, I don't really recognize this, but we ended up meeting, I was so impressed by this. There were these students there. It was from, like, I remember from Mexico, from Russia, from Spain, from Turkey. There was someone from Slovakia, but they were students who were taking 2 weeks out of their summer, and they were breaking rocks that came from the mountain, and they were outlining. It's a 10-year project, but they're outlining where the barracks were at that camp. And that's what they were going to do. And I was like so super impressed with these young people. And I remember just thinking, I was like, okay, if there are people like this in the world, I think things will be okay if they're going to spend their time here doing something like this. So after meeting Colette, I was like, oh, that would be great to kind of hook her up with maybe some students. And we got in touch with the museum at the camp, and they're like, oh, that already happened. But there's somebody in France you should talk to, that he runs a museum in France, and sometimes he takes students. Maybe he can help you. And then we got in touch with him, explained that, we were thinking of asking Colette, we didn't ask her yet, of whether she would go back to the camp. But, we thought maybe if she could meet a student there, and we heard that you bring students, and he's like, I already did it. But there was one student who was not able to go. She's only 17 years old. But she would. I think you should probably meet her. And we're writing a book about all of the French deportees to this particular concentration camp. And Colette, her brother Jean-Pierre, nobody's written anything about him yet. So I could give that to Lucy. I'll just give her this research assignment to do it. See what she comes up with. So Lucy, who was 17 when we filmed that.
I mean, it's like they wrote this for you in some respect. You know what I mean? Like, it's incredible.
Yeah. And then Lucy did the research. She was just fascinated. Like, she was a history student who just was fascinated with this idea of deportations and the French deportations, So she did the research, sent it to Colette. Colette was really impressed by it. And then told us, I don't know if I want to go. Because we had said, would you think you would go back there? And her initial response is like, what good would that do? What would be the point of it? well, let me think about it. I'll think about it, but I'm not sure. Well, then when Lucy sent her the stuff, she was like really fascinated by what she found out about her brother, and said, well, so Lucy, she's only 17 years old, and she's never been to a concentration camp before. And now, mind you, neither had Colette. Colette had not ever been to Germany. And she said, I think Lucy would need someone to protect her if she goes to that. So maybe I'll go with her just to make sure that, you know, it's not too hard of an experience for her. That's what Colette said and believed, right? So she thought that she was going to be the one who had to carry Lucy through this experience, right? And then as you see, it's kind of like almost the opposite. And, you know, we're actually like, they're really helping each other. But that was it. So it was like, so the idea was what would happen if they went together? And like, that it was the extent to which we sort of like said, okay, well, why don't we film that journey? And then we went off not knowing if they would get along, if Colette would really like Lucy.
Oh, they got along, right?
Oh, of course. Yeah, of course they did. Yeah. Like she,
I mean, you could see it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, you really
didn't know
could
it.
see
we didn't
it.
know it ahead of time, you know, because Colette, like, she's like a very forceful person, and you know, you never know.
No, you definitely do not know. I'm actually going to put the link to the film in the chat for people.
But I would say this though about that. We came back, so this was still for a video game. This you would unlock, and by the way, these pieces, there are supposed to be like 7 minutes, 6 minutes, you know, that you play a level, you unlock this thing, you see this film, and then you move on. When we came back, I talked to Peter, and I was like, Peter, at Electronic Arts, was like, you know, this was really the most emotional thing I think that I've ever documented. I don't think that this should just stay in a video game. You know, is what I said. I said, I was interested. I like the idea that I was going to go into a video game, because that was an audience that I just had never, I don't think, really been in front of. And I thought, well, hey, I mean, more people play video games than watch movies, you know, in any given year. So I said, could we take it to a film festival? And, you know, Peter being Peter was like, well, finish the film and show it to me. I don't know. Like, let me see what the film would be like. So we sat down and we did it, and we felt it was about 25 minutes, you know, from something that was supposed to be 6, but it felt right at 25. And we sent it to Peter, and he really championed the film at Electronic Arts. He's like, look, you know, I know this is for this, but they want to just send it to film festivals. It's a great film. And Electronic Arts was like, okay. And we went to Big Sky Documentary Film Festival, which is a great documentary film festival in Missoula, Montana. And we won the documentary award there, documentary short award there, which automatically qualified us for the Oscars, because they were an Oscar qualifying film festival. So we were able to, you know, based on that win, and then we won 2 other festivals as well, but we only needed that one, and then we were able to enter it into.
And what do you remember about that evening?
Well, it was COVID.
Yeah.
so it was. I've never been to the Oscars before, and apparently there are like normally 3,000 people who attend the Oscars. And there were about 250 people there. Wow. And it was at Union Station in downtown LA. So, because it was open and outdoor, and there was, I remember going on we went on a Zoom. Steven Soderbergh was the producer, and 2 others were the producer of that. And he had a Zoom with all of the nominees. And it was basically like, you're not going to be home in your pajamas on a Zoom call for this. You have to come to LA for this, for the ceremony. Now, in order for us to do that, you're gonna have to come out a week ahead of time. We're gonna have this testing regimen, like so. It was this,
geez.
It was this big thing. So we went out a week ahead of time and did the testing, and we had like an Airbnb and you know, and basically we went, and it was really a lot of fun, actually. I mean, it was not the huge. I mean, there was press there.
Yeah, I think smaller probably makes it a little easier.
Yeah, and it was, and you could sort of talk to people, you could see people, you know, that you might only like see them from afar. And what was interesting about that is that the way that they ran it, because it was a very small, they created a very small room inside of the train station, this open air train station. And in the commercial break, so they would have let's just say, you know, best actor, you know, is up here. They're, for you at home, you're watching this, and it's like, okay, so there they are, they're sitting in the room. So when the commercial break came, they're like, okay, everyone out, and everyone had to get out, and the next group had to come in and sit down in the seats.
Oh, wow.
So that's how it was. So we got, when we were called, okay, documentary, feature and short coming up, you know.
Switch. Everybody switch.
There was commercial, because animation was right before us, because Pete Docter, he had just won for Soul right before us, and then there was commercial, and then they were just like, okay, everybody get up in there. So we get into our seats, and they're like, okay, you're sitting there and you're sitting there, and I sat down. They're like, no, Anthony, you're there, and because they had like the camera sort of already set, but you had to sit, and it was like really confusing. And then Marley Matlin was giving the
presenter,
was the presenter. So at the same time, I'm trying to say, where is she? And like, we were kind of like sitting up. I mean, it wasn't that far, but we were like up in the top row of, it was kind of like this little, felt like kind of a Hollywood Bowl kind of a thing that they created. And I'm like looking for, I'm like, where is she? I can't even see her. And they're like, okay, 3, 2. I mean, it's all happening this fast. And it's just like, up. Okay, our next thing is, you know, documentary short, and it's, you know, this, then go through all of them, and they're just like Colette, and I don't even think I was like sitting there for 90 seconds from being like there, and they didn't tell us how to get down there. You just sort of had to make your way. So I'm like, all right, Elise, come on. And we sort of walked down and got up, and I gave my speech and got the thing, and I turned, and I mean, I don't remember everything I said, but I do remember saying that it was Colette's birthday, which was really interesting.
Oh, wow.
So it was a great present for her. But also, I remember just saying that I imagine that this is maybe what the first Oscars were like, because it was just sort of a small party.
Yeah,
I think.
small venue. Yeah. Well, you met your childhood hero.
Ah, yes, I did. That is Harrison Ford. And the story, and of course, as I said, it was COVID. I didn't take. I have other ones where I don't have my mask. So that that photograph came about because I will just tell you quickly, when we were on the stage and when it was done, turned around, and as I turned around, Brad Pitt and Stephen Yeun are like just like right, like I don't know, not even like 10 feet away from me. They're waiting, I guess, to come on and like and do the next thing. So I was kind of a little bit, I guess, starstruck or something like that. And I was like, and he's like, and Brad Pitt was like, hey, congrats, man, you know. And I wasn't going to go over and talk to him. I wasn't, but there was somebody who was working for the Oscars, just like come this way, don't go to him, come this way, you know. So I was like, okay, you know. And we went, and it was funny because I was now standing in line behind Pete Docter because we were waiting for this long row. And I know Pete because Michael did the music for Up, Pete's film, which won in 2010, and so it was just kind of funny being behind him. It was just a bizarre evening. And
yeah,
then
those things are, and when it's a whirlwind, it's crazy.
Exactly. But right before they have the Vanity Fair like photo shoot, when you go in there, I see Harrison Ford walking out of that. It was kind of like this little tent area. And I was like, oh my God, this is my chance. There's no way he's going to say no to me if I ask him. If I'm holding this,
Right.
if I ask him, there's no way he's not going to say no. So I went up to him and I was like, oh, Mr. Ford, hi. I I just want to say what a big fan I am, and you know, if my like 10-year-old self could see me now holding this and talking to you, like my head would explode. If my head, I said, "Can I get a picture with you?" He was like, "Yes, of course. That's very nice. Yes." And then, like, you know, I turned and, like, you know, took that, but I was not even thinking I had my mask on, you know, with that picture. But that was it was a great moment.
It's a nice end to that evening, I'm sure.
Oh
I'm
yeah, yeah.
sure.
Well, wait, no, there was one more thing that happened, I will just say. So we hung out afterwards, because you can't now. My wife and Elisa's partner, who were there, they were told, you guys can stay up here now if you want to stay and watch the rest of the ceremony from here. You can stay up here. So Elisa and I were sort of just making the rounds, like the press. Then we sat down. So at the end of the evening, there were no parties, no governor's ball. There was nothing because of COVID. So we just had to basically go home. So we're walking to our car, and a guy comes running after us with a suitcase. He's like, excuse me, wait, hold on, wait 1 sec. And he's like, I'm from Price Waterhouse Cooper. Is that who
Yeah.
And he's like, I have the backup envelopes, and I wanted to just give you the backup envelope. And he opened up this little briefcase he had, and I had gotten the actual envelope where it says, you know, the winner is, you know, Colette, but he gave the backup envelope to my co-nominee Elise, and I just thought it was really nice that he ran us down to find us. Here's the backup envelope. You should have it.
So you both have one.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah.
See, there are nice people. There are nice people in the world.
There are, and I know. I just want to say one more thing about this. I went back to at this point, we were staying at my brother Michael's place, and he had kind of just like a little party. Like, we were there, and the family were there, my kids were there. Like, it was just kind of fun. And I was sitting there. He has this, like, just this little bar in the backyard, and I was kind of just like lost a little bit. I was sort of like just looking at the Oscar, and I was thinking like the thought of like, well, I guess that's it. I guess my career is over. I was just like kind of like, I was like thinking of like just kind of like all things. I was, you know, and then all of a sudden I just see he comes by and he puts his Oscar right next to mine, and then he like grabs them both, and he goes, "Wait a minute, why is mine heavier than yours? Mine's heavier than yours." I was like, "What?" And I grabbed them, and then of course he was just joking around. They were the same thing, and it was so hilarious. I mean, like, it was like actually one of the funniest moments of the night. Like, he just sort of like, yeah.
I love that.
Yes,
I love that. I mean, it's incredible for two kids from New Jersey who loved filmmaking.
Yeah.
And kudos to you on the film you did about Michael, Director by Night.
Yeah.
Really beautiful.
Yes.
Beautiful way to look at both of your careers. I mean, you really have, both of you, held on to cameras since you were little kids. Yes. And I just thought it was a really great documentary about.
Yeah. You know. Well, that was once he was going to direct, you know, the Werewolf Film, I said I would love to do. Wasn't really a behind the scenes, but I pitched it to Marvel as just saying it would be sort of more about him, like, always wanting to make.
Yeah. You know, what was it difficult to get approval?
No, they really liked that idea. They thought, okay, that would be something different. That would be, because I told them I really did not want to do a behind the scenes. You know, what you would see, because you're just like, you know, you see these, how many times you got to look at a green screen, or how, you know, I said this will be sort of a very personal piece about him, and then I could actually use films, the old movies that he made and all this kind of stuff. But I will tell you,
I made an old movie with him and Andrew Ellard up in
Sleepy Hollow.
Sleepy Hollow.
Yes, I know. I used to remember the name of that, but I will say this: there are, you know how in your work life, there's just stress, right? Stress in work, and did you ever experience stress in your family life? right? Yeah. So sometimes you put the two of those together, and I will say, there were some very interesting moments to have to kind of get around and grapple with in terms of actually doing that film. Nothing too serious, but there were some times when I was just like, I really have to have all of this stress like now around me about
I was just thinking about something because your sister's not in it, right?
Oh boy, you bringing up a very touchy subject.
Uh-oh. Wait,
No.
And the reason I say that is her husband in it.
Wow. Well, okay.
Am I right that I recognize him?
Archivally, she is in it, and so is he. No, he's not. He is not in it. Sort of present day.
So there is somebody in there that I'm gonna have to go to the time code to find it and ask you who he is, because maybe he's a friend.
Was he what did he go on to the high school stage?
No, before that he did say something. I'll find it and send it to you and ask you, because I thought it was Marie's husband. I feel like it was somebody I had met at some point.
I mean, it's possible that this is someone that you may have met. Maybe
and
I high school friend, but no, he wasn't in it. And I joke about that idea that it was like that's a sort of. The thing is, I have another brother, John, also. But
maybe it was John then. That's what I thought. So then it's John.
But was it? But not present day, because
what was his hair like in the?
Oh yeah, like back then. Oh yeah. He had sort of like kind of bushy black hair.
Yeah. I think it's John. Okay.
Well, send me the clip.
I will. I do think it's John. I will tell you
that it was a deliberate decision, only because it was like, well, what is this film about? Yeah. Like we can't put everything in the film.
But I love how you incorporated your mother and father. I mean,
that was important.
But it was important because of that whole story. And actually the funny, everybody should see it. It's a great documentary, but the funniest is calling mom and asking her about letting you, do things she shouldn't have let you do.
Oh yes, yeah. Saying like, well, why did you, and it was not about. I wasn't like.
I know that, but it was just funny.
We sort of like, wanted to take it was like, well, we were busy, we were working, and you guys were, maybe doing things you shouldn't have been doing. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. It wasn't actually clear to me that she was going to come out as necessarily a character in that, the way she did, but it was just sort of I think
moms always do, Anthony, don't they? Moms always do.
Oh yeah. But it started as simply as I was driving to the set, and I called my parents, and I was talking to them, and she said something, and I was like, oh, I should probably just record these, and I just started recording them as I was driving around talking with her, and that sort of is how the idea came about.
That's smart. Well done.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Yes. Oh, thank you.
So happy of all your success, and stay in touch, because we'll do this again when you've got something. Is there another project in the works?
No, nothing like super official. Nothing superficial. I'm having fun teaching at SVA. I'm doing this the podcast that I'm getting off the ground and stuff like that.
What are you teaching at SVA?
I'm actually teaching a really interesting course called AI and filmmaking. It's with MFA students, graduate students, and it's just like looking at what are the possibilities with these new tools that are coming out, and what could you do? Could you make a film with these? And it's really it's a class that just explores these new tools, and I will tell you, there's been some very interesting things coming out of that class that perhaps I could come back and share with you when we're
okay. Good. Yeah. Anthony, thank you so much, my friend.
Yeah, Alan, it was so great. Yeah, great talking with you. Thank you so much.
You are so welcome. And everybody, podcast link is down below right here on YouTube. Have a great afternoon, Anthony.
All right. You too. Thanks so much.
You got it. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Remember, the podcast link is down below. Join me tonight at 7 p.m. for a Conversations with Alan episode featuring director, producer, and writer Mark Bennett and his producer Lisa Efris. They are the creators of the powerful new documentary For the Living, a ride you will never forget. And on Thursday, October 7th at 7 p.m. Eastern, actress and author Barbara Rodell will join me live. If you haven't yet subscribed to my YouTube channel, you can do so down below. Turn on the notifications for reminders of all upcoming shows. And remember, if you'd like to stream audio versions, just search The Locker Room on your favorite podcast app. Have a great rest of your afternoon. I'll see you tonight at 7.